Happy Monday, 7th and 8th graders. These are your solutions for your problems from Friday. So please make sure you're checking over your work. Remember, we were using the distributive property, taking care of distributive property before we solved an equation. Okay, those of you that are submitting work, you're doing a really great job. So keep it up. And then we're going to add in one more thing today. Each day we're just going to keep adding, seeing something new in an equation. So if you look at these equations, go ahead and write them down. And if you remember, the equal sign is the balance. So whenever you first look at an equation, I like for you to draw a line down the equal sign so that you can see the two different sides of the equation. Okay, and if you notice on this one, there's a variable on both sides. We've got 9c over here and 8c over here. Okay, and this is different. When we practiced combining like terms last week, the variables were on one side together, so we had to combine them up. When they're on two different sides, we're going to have to remove one with inverse operations like we've been doing. We've got to remove one from one side and move it over to the other side. Okay, so I could do it either way. I'm going to look at this 8c right here. Remember, I'm trying to isolate the c on one side by itself. So I'm going to have to remove this 8c from this side before I do anything else. It's a positive 8c because there's no sign in front of it. So it's a positive 8c. So to remove it, I'm going to have to subtract it. 8c minus 8c cancels out to nothing, which is what I wanted it to do. But then I'm also, since I subtracted 8c from over here, I'm going to have to come over here and I have to make sure that I can't subtract it from this -5 because this isn't a like term, but I'm going to have to remove it from here. Remember, I subtracted 8c here, so I'm going to have to come over here to my 9c and subtract 8c. So 9c minus 8c is just 1c. And I'm going to rewrite. And I noticed some of you haven't always been rewriting, and I know that sometimes it's easier not to. But as we move further along, rewriting is important. Okay? So we've got 1c minus 5 equals, and then we canceled that out, so I'm just left with 29 over here. And then you're left with an equation that looks familiar. We've gotten the variable moved over to one side. So here I just need to add, I've got a -5, I need to reverse that by adding 5. So if I added 5 here, and I also need to add 5 here. So I've got 1c. I'm going to rewrite this just as c. We don't need to have the 1 in front of it. Okay. We know that if it's 1c, that if it's just a c, that it's just 1c. So c equals 29 plus 5 would be what? 34. So c equals 34. Okay, so this is how all of our problems are going to look today. They're going to have a variable on both sides, and you're going to have to start. The first thing you need to do is to move the variable from one side to the other. Okay, so let's look at this one. If you look, we've got a -3x on this side and a 10x on that side. So we're not combining them up, we're moving one from one side to the other. I'm going to look, if I remove this -3x, then I'm going to be left with nothing over here. So I'm going to remove, I usually like to remove from the right side first. So you have a positive 10x. So to remove that, you're going to subtract 10x, and 10x minus 10x removes it. That's what we were trying to do. 10x minus 10x cancels out. But since I subtracted 10x here, I also have to subtract 10x here. So then if I look at this, I've got -3x minus 10x, and a -3 and a -10 is -13x. And I'm going to rewrite what I'm left with over here. This is a -15. Make sure you pay attention to the sign that's in front of it. Remember, it uses the sign that's directly in front of it. So this is a -15. Okay. And it looks like this one is not, let me see if I wrote. No. I didn't write this the way I wanted to, but that's okay. So if we've got -13x, we're going to have to divide by -13. I'm going to show you this. If you have something that works out like this, it's okay. So x equals negative 15 over 13. 15 and 13, 15 does not divide by 13. The fraction can't simplify because 13 doesn't divide by anything. But a negative over a negative is a positive. So I'm going to just rewrite this as 15 over 13. And that's okay. Usually I just try to write your problems so that they work out evenly. If it doesn't work out evenly, that's okay. All right, and I'm just going to write it as an improper fraction, right? Okay, go ahead and copy down these two. And remember, I like you to start by drawing a line down the equal sign so that you can see the two sides, okay? Especially if you're struggling with this, you need to make sure you're doing that. If you look, we've got a variable on both sides. We've got a 6r here and a 7r here. So we're going to have to remove one and move it over to the other side. Generally, I know you guys like to see the variable in front, the variable on the left side. So let's move this from here. So positive 7r, we can remove that by subtracting 7r. Okay, 7r minus 7r cancels out. But I'm also going to have to subtract 7r from over here, and I have to do it in line with the r. I have to keep it with its like term. So 6r minus 7r would be negative 1r. And I'm going to rewrite everything that I have left. So negative 1r plus 7 equals 13. Okay, so I'm still, here's my two sides. I'm trying to get this r by itself. The r is what I'm trying to isolate. So I'm going to take off the plus 7. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I get negative 1r equals 6. Now, I can't have a negative r, so I'm going to have to divide by negative 1 in order to, the negative 1 divided by negative 1 cancels out. So r equals negative 6. Okay, oops. I think I've got this. There you go. Okay, let's look at this next one. 13 minus 4x equals 1 minus x. So I'm going to start by drawing a line down the middle. And I know that I need to get, I've got an x on both sides. So I'm going to have to remove 1 from one side. I'm going to go over here to this negative x. And a negative x, the inverse of negative is positive. The inverse of subtraction is addition. So to reverse the negative x, I'm going to use a positive x, a plus x. Now, if I added x over here, negative x plus x cancels out, which is what I wanted it to do. But I'm going to have to add an x over here, and I need to do it in line with the x's. So plus x. So what I have right here is negative 4x plus x. So negative 4x's plus one more x is going to be negative 3x. And then I'm going to rewrite everything. So I've got 13 here in front equals, and then here I'm just left with a 1. That negative x got canceled out. Okay, so let's look. What I'm trying to isolate is this x right here. So I'm going to need to get rid of this 13 first. And if you look, remember the sign is what's in front of it. This negative sign is not affecting the 13. This is a positive 13. So to reverse a positive 13, I have to use negative 13, minus 13. So this is literally 13 minus 13, which cancels out. But since I did minus 13 here, I'm going to have to also do minus 13 here. Okay, this is why writing your work down is important. Okay, some of you that were trying to just write the answer down, I know that you can do that, but as we get more complicated, writing your work down will save you mistakes. So let's rewrite this. We've got a negative 3x, and then 1 minus 13 is negative 12. And then the last thing I need to do is divide by negative 3 and get x equals negative 4. Okay. Let's do 2 more of these together, and then I'll give you some practice problems. Pause. Okay, let's do 2 more together. So on this first one, I draw the line. And I see I've got an X here. Oops, I did not write this right. Let's see. Erase this one. I don't want, we're not going to do this one. We're going to do this one. Sorry. I didn't write my problems down the way I wanted to. Okay, so let's focus on this one. Draw your line on the equal sign. Okay, and something funny is going to happen on this one. We see we've got a 6x here and a 6x over there. Okay, so I know that I need to remove the 6x from one side and move it over to the other side. So 6x minus 6x cancels out. And since I subtracted 6x from here, I also have to subtract 6x from here. And this is what I told you whenever I said that something funny was going to happen. 6x minus 6x also cancels out, or is 0. You could think of it as it's 0 plus 4 equals -8. So if I go ahead and write this as 4 equals -8, I have no variable. My variable canceled out. And I'm left with something that is not true. You have to ask yourself, when this happens, when the variables cancel out, you have to ask yourself, is what you're left with true or is it false? Does 4 equal -8? And no, 4 does not equal -8. It never does. So when you're left with something that's false, that means that there is no solution. That means that there's nothing that you could put in there for x that would make this true ever. There's no solution for x. Okay, so if that happens and your variables cancel out, if it's not true, if you're left with something that's not true, then your answer is no solution. Let me write another one over here while we're talking about that. Let's say that we had 6x plus 4. So let's say that we have this. Go ahead and write that down. And then the same thing's going to happen. We're going to subtract 6x from both sides, and it ends up canceling out on both sides. Okay, so that happened again. And now when we rewrite it, we're left with 4 equals 4. Okay, we're left with something that's true. And if you look back at the equation that I gave you 2 that were exactly the same. I gave you 2 that were exactly equal. 6x plus 4 equals 6x plus 4. And we know that that's true. So that means if they're exactly the same and you end up with something that is true, that means that any value that you put in there for x would make this true. So it means that it has lots of answers. Okay? And the way that we write that is all real numbers. So basically, whenever you get one of these problems where your variable cancels out, if you get something that's false, if you end up with something that's not true, then that means there's no solution to that problem. If you end up with something that is true, then that means that any real number would work. Okay? So I'm not sure if you will come across any of those in your problems today, but it's just something good to know. Okay, because it does come up. Here are your practice problems. And today is Monday, so if you would like credit for these, have them to me by Tuesday night. And then we're going to add a little something else to them on Wednesday and then something else on Friday. Have a great Monday. I miss you guys. You're doing great.